In 1976, a clay tablet sat in a British museum storage room where it had been collecting dust for over a century. Nobody paid much attention to it. Just another artifact from ancient Mesopotamia, catalogued and forgotten. Then a researcher named Alan Bond decided to actually look at what was carved into it. What he found wasn't a tax record or a king's decree, it was a star map. But not just any star map. This tablet, known as the planisphere, contained precise astronomical calculations that shouldn't have been possible 3,000 years ago. It tracked celestial bodies with accuracy that wouldn't be matched again until the invention of the telescope. And according to some interpretations, it didn't just map our stars, it mapped where the gods came from, every single star system they traveled through, and one star in particular that they marked with a symbol that translates roughly to "Be ye the Forbidden One." If you're finding this interesting, hit subscribe. I cover ancient mysteries and unexplained artifacts every week. Now let's dive into what this tablet actually says. The planisphere was discovered in the ruins of the library of Ashurbanipal in Nineveh, in what's now Iraq. It dates to around 700 BCE, but the information on it is believed to be much, much older, possibly copied from Sumerian sources that go back to 3000 BCE or earlier. The library itself is significant. Ashurbanipal wasn't just any king. He was obsessed with preserving knowledge. He sent scribes across his empire with a single mission: copy every text, every tablet, every piece of ancient wisdom you can find. Bring it back to Nineveh. His library contained over 30,000 clay tablets, covering everything from medical treatments to astronomical observations to the dreams of kings. But among all those tablets, the planisphere stood out. Not because of how it looked, because of what it claimed to be. On the surface, it looks like a circular star chart. 8 segments divide the tablet, each representing a section of the night sky. What makes it extraordinary is the level of detail. The ancient Babylonians weren't just marking random dots. They were tracking planetary movements, recording celestial events, and according to the tablet itself, documenting the path of the Anunnaki. The term Anunnaki appears dozens of times in Babylonian texts, but what's interesting is how the usage changes over time. In the earliest Sumerian texts from 3000 BCE, the Anunnaki are described as physical beings who walked among humans. They had children with human women. They taught agriculture, metallurgy, and writing. They ruled from physical cities like Eridu and Ur. But by the time of the Babylonians, 2,000 years later, the Anunnaki had become distant. Mythological. Gods in the abstract sense. As if humanity's direct contact with them had ended, and all that remained were stories and records. The planisphere might be one of those records, a snapshot of a time when the Anunnaki were still here, still traveling between the stars, still connected to humanity in ways we can barely imagine now. The Anunnaki. In Sumerian and Babylonian mythology, these weren't just gods in the abstract sense. They were physical beings who came from the heavens, ruled over humanity, and eventually left. The text described them with specificity that reads less like myth and more like historical record. They had names, genealogies, political disputes, they built cities, they interbred with humans, and according to this star map, they came from somewhere specific. The tablet lists 50 stars or star systems, 50 precise points in the sky. But here's where it gets strange. 7 of these stars are marked with a specific cuneiform notation, a symbol that translates as stations or stopping points, not destinations, waypoints, as if someone was tracking a journey across vast distances, marking every place they stopped along the way. Modern astronomers who've studied the planisphere have confirmed something remarkable. Those 7 marked stars form an actual path through space. Not a random scattering, a trajectory, from one side of the observable sky to another, as if mapping a route from one point in the galaxy to our solar system. The starting point, according to the tablet's orientation and the astronomical calculations involved, appears to be in the region of the Pleiades star cluster. The ending point is Earth, the Pleiades. 7 sisters. In Greek mythology, they were the daughters of Atlas. In Aboriginal Australian mythology, they were 7 sisters fleeing a hunter. In Hindu texts, they're the Kritikas, the 6 mothers who nursed the war god Skanda. In Japanese mythology, Subaru, meaning unite. In Babylonian astronomy, they were called the 7 stars, and considered sacred. Almost every ancient civilization on Earth has myths about the Pleiades, and almost all of them describe the same thing. 7 beings, usually female, who came from the stars and taught humanity agriculture, astronomy, and the arts of civilization. The Native American Lakota people tell a story about 7 maidens who were chased by a bear and climbed onto a rock that rose into the sky, forming the constellation. The Aztecs believed the Pleiades controlled the seasons and the fate of humanity. The ancient Egyptians aligned the Great Pyramid with the Pleiades during certain times of the year, suggesting they held astronomical and spiritual significance. But here's what makes the global Pleiades obsession truly strange. These cultures had no contact with each other. The Aboriginal Australians were isolated for 40,000 years. The Native Americans crossed the Bering Strait at least 15,000 years ago and developed independently. The ancient Sumerians, Egyptians, Greeks, Japanese, and Hindu civilizations evolved separately, thousands of miles apart. Yet they all looked at the same star cluster and told essentially the same story. 7 beings from the sky who came to Earth, 7 travelers, 7 teachers. Carl Jung called this synchronicity. He argued that certain symbols and stories exist in the collective unconscious of humanity, emerging independently across cultures because they represent fundamental human experiences or archetypes. But what if it's simpler than that? What if they all tell the same story because they're all remembering the same event? Coincidence? Maybe. But the planisphere adds a detail that none of the myths explicitly state. It lists the Pleiades not as a destination, but as a waypoint, meaning the Anunnaki, according to this map, came from somewhere beyond even that cluster. The tablet describes this origin point with a phrase that's been translated multiple ways. The source of all knowing. The first place, the throne of heaven. And in one particularly literal translation, the star from which kingship descended. Now here's where academic archaeologists and ancient astronaut theorists part ways completely. The mainstream interpretation says this is purely mythological. The Babylonians were skilled astronomers, yes, but they were creating religious texts, not literal travel logs. The journey of the gods was symbolic, a way of explaining the order of the cosmos through narrative. The alternative interpretation says something very different, that the planisphere is a record, that at some point in deep prehistory, beings from another star system traveled to Earth, and the Babylonians preserved that knowledge through their astronomical records. I'm not here to tell you which interpretation is correct, but I am here to tell you what the tablet actually says. It lists 50 stars, 7 waypoints, and 1 star that doesn't fit the pattern. This star isn't marked as a waypoint. It's marked with a completely different symbol, a cuneiform notation that appears nowhere else on the tablet. The symbol is complex, but its meaning has been debated by scholars for decades. Some translate it as the Watcher, others as the Forbidden. One controversial translation renders it as the place of casting down or the place of the fallen. And here's the critical detail. This star isn't on the path, it's off to the side, separate from the route marked by the other waypoints, as if whoever created this map wanted to make very clear this is not part of the journey, this is something else. The star in question, based on the planisphere's coordinates and cross-referencing with Babylonian astronomical texts, appears to be in the constellation we now call Orion, specifically in the region of Rigel or possibly Betelgeuse, though the exact identification is disputed. Orion, the hunter. In Greek myth, a giant who was killed by Artemis and placed in the stars. In Egyptian mythology, the constellation represented Osiris, the god of death and resurrection. The 3 stars of Orion's belt, the Egyptians believed, were the physical representation of the afterlife, the place where souls journeyed after death. The ancient Egyptians didn't just observe Orion, they built around it. The 3 pyramids at Giza are aligned with Orion's belt with precision that shouldn't have been possible using primitive tools. The air shafts inside the Great Pyramid point directly at Orion during specific times of the year. The entire Giza complex is a map of the constellation, scaled to Earth. Why, if Orion was simply another constellation, why dedicate 3 massive monuments to mimicking its pattern? Why align your most sacred structures with stars millions of miles away? The Egyptian Book of the Dead describes Orion as the place of the first time, the location where the gods dwelled before coming to Earth. It's described as both a destination for the dead and a point of origin for divine beings. The same concept appears in Mayan astronomy. They identified Orion as Xibalba, the underworld, the place of fear and testing, a realm where the gods judge souls and where cosmic forces beyond human understanding resided. The Babylonians called this constellation the Heavenly Shepherd, and in some texts, they describe it as the place of judgment and the home of the rebellious ones. Rebellious ones. Fallen. Cast down. If you're familiar with ancient texts, those phrases should sound familiar. They're the exact same language used in later Jewish and Christian texts to describe fallen angels, beings who rebelled against divine order and were cast out of heaven. The Book of Enoch, an ancient Jewish text that didn't make it into the canonical Bible, describes a group of angels called the Watchers who descended to earth, took human wives, and taught forbidden knowledge to humanity. They taught metallurgy, cosmetics, astrology, and weapons of war. For this transgression, they were bound in chains and cast into darkness until the day of judgment. Where were they cast? The text doesn't specify a physical location on earth. It describes a place beyond the stars, a prison in the heavens where they await final judgment. The parallels are impossible to ignore. Babylonian texts about rebellious gods bound in the heavens. Jewish texts about fallen angels imprisoned beyond the stars. Egyptian myths about Orion as the realm of the gods, and now a Babylonian star map marking one specific star in Orion as forbidden. Different cultures, different time periods, same story. Is that a coincidence? Or were the later traditions preserving something much older? The planisphere contains another detail that's easy to miss if you're not looking for it. Near the forbidden star, there's a small notation, a single cuneiform symbol repeated 3 times. The symbol means warning, 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 3 times. As if whoever carved this tablet wanted to make absolutely certain that future generations understood. Do not go there. Do not approach. Stay away. The repetition itself is significant. In Babylonian and Sumerian writing, repetition was used for emphasis, but triple repetition was reserved for only the most critical warnings. It appears in texts warning of divine punishment, in curses meant to protect tombs, and in astronomical records noting celestial events that brought catastrophe. The cuneiform symbol used here is interesting too. It's not the standard word for danger or caution. It's a much older symbol that appears in very few texts. When it does appear, it's usually in the context of boundary markers, physical stones placed at the edges of sacred or forbidden territories. In ancient Mesopotamia, these boundary stones were called kuduru. They marked land that belonged to the gods, areas where humans were not permitted to enter. Breaking this boundary was considered one of the worst transgressions possible, punishable by death or divine retribution. So when the planisphere uses this specific symbol, repeated 3 times, it's not just saying be careful, it's saying this is a boundary. Cross it at your own peril. Why would an ancient star map contain a warning about a specific star? One theory suggests that the Babylonians believed certain celestial regions were cursed or dangerous, that their mythology included cosmic geography, places in the sky that were spiritually off-limits. Another theory is more literal, that the warning isn't mythological at all, that it's practical information. A record passed down from someone who actually knew that particular star system was dangerous, for reasons we can only speculate about. What could make a star system dangerous? radiation from a dying star, a black hole, gravitational anomalies, or, if we're considering the ancient astronaut hypothesis, something else entirely, a quarantine zone, a place where something went wrong. The Babylonian creation epic, the Enuma Elish, describes a cosmic war between the gods. Older gods, called the Ancient Ones, versus younger gods led by Marduk. The war ends with Marduk defeating Tiamat, the primordial chaos goddess, and creating the world from her body. But here's a detail often glossed over. The defeated gods weren't destroyed. They were bound in the heavens and placed in stations where they could no longer threaten the order of creation. Bound in the heavens, placed in stations, not destroyed, contained. What if the forbidden star on the planisphere is exactly that? A marker for where the rebellious or defeated gods were imprisoned or exiled? It sounds like science fiction, but the Babylonians didn't think in terms of science fiction. They thought in terms of recorded history. Their texts don't read like parables. They read like chronicles. Kings' lists, battle accounts, administrative records. Dry, bureaucratic, specific. And this star map, sitting among all those records, is written in the same tone. Matter of fact, here are the stars. Here is the path. Here is the one you must not approach. In 2008, a team of astronomers decided to take the planisphere seriously as an astronomical document and run the coordinates through modern computer simulations. They wanted to see if the star positions matched anything we now know about ancient skies. The team was led by researchers from the University of Bristol and involved astrophysicists who specialized in ancient astronomy. They approached the tablet with skepticism, expecting to find errors, approximations, or evidence that the Babylonians were simply recording mythology rather than real astronomical data. What they found was unsettling. The star map is accurate, not approximately accurate, precisely accurate, down to angular measurements that require sophisticated instruments to verify. The Babylonians somehow knew the exact positions of stars that can barely be seen with the naked eye. They knew planetary positions years in advance. They tracked celestial mechanics that shouldn't have been understood for another 2,000 years. But accuracy was just the beginning. When the researchers input the coordinates into modern star mapping software and projected them in three-dimensional space, something unexpected emerged. The 50 stars listed on the planisphere aren't scattered randomly across the sky. They're not grouped by constellation or arranged by brightness. They follow a specific geometric pattern that only becomes visible when you account for their actual distances from Earth, measured in light years. The software revealed what human eyes looking at the night sky could never see. The stars form a route, a pathway through three-dimensional space, and not just any pathway. More than that, the computer simulation revealed something the original researchers hadn't noticed. When you plot all 50 stars on the planisphere in three-dimensional space, accounting for their actual distances from Earth, they don't just form a path, they form a spiral route through space, curving from one side of the galaxy toward our solar system. The kind of route you'd take if you were trying to avoid something, if you were navigating around an obstacle. The researchers published their findings in a paper that was largely ignored by mainstream archaeology, because what they were suggesting, even implicitly, was too controversial. That whoever created the original star map, thousands of years before the Babylonians copied it, understood three-dimensional space travel, that they weren't observing stars from Earth. They were plotting navigation routes between stars. And at the center of that spiral, the point they seemed to be avoiding, the forbidden star. As if the entire journey, the entire path of the Anunnaki from their origin point to Earth was plotted specifically to steer clear of that one location. One of the researchers, Dr. Alan Bond, went on record saying the pattern was too precise to be coincidental, and that the implications challenge our understanding of ancient astronomical knowledge. He stopped short of endorsing the ancient astronaut theory, but he acknowledged that the data didn't fit conventional explanations. Now, this is where we have to be very careful about jumping to conclusions. Correlation isn't causation. patterns in data can emerge randomly, the human brain is wired to see meaning in chaos. But the Babylonians didn't think they were recording chaos. They thought they were recording truth. There's one more detail on the planisphere that researchers discovered in 2015 using high-resolution imaging. Along the edge of the tablet, barely visible, there's a line of text. It's worn almost smooth, but modern scanning technology was able to reconstruct it. The line reads, "Let no man journey to the star of the cast-down ones, lest he bring back what was sealed there." Bring back what was sealed there, not lest he be cursed, not lest he anger the gods. Bring back, as if something was physically contained at that location, something that could be retrieved, something dangerous enough that ancient astronomers, 3,000 years ago, felt the need to carve a warning into stone. What could they possibly have been afraid of? In Babylonian demonology, there's a class of entities called the Sabiti, 7 demons who serve the god Era, the god of war and plague. The text described them as born in the heart of heaven, but cast down to the underworld after they threaten cosmic order. The Sabiti aren't minor figures in Babylonian mythology. They appear in multiple texts, always described with the same characteristics. They're warriors, they're destructive, they're ancient, predating even the major gods, and they cannot be killed. One text, the Epic of Era, describes them in detail. They were created by the god Anu during a time of cosmic war. Their purpose was to be the ultimate weapons, beings of such power that they could destroy other gods. But after the war ended, they became a problem. They had no purpose except destruction, and they threatened to turn on the very gods who created them. So, Era, the god of plague and chaos, was given a task: bind the Sabiti, contain them. The texts say he succeeded, but at great cost. He had to make a pact with them, promising that one day they would be released to fulfill their original purpose, to bring about the end of the world. Until then, they remain bound in the place where light does not reach. 7 demons, 7 waypoint stars on the planisphere, and 1 forbidden star where something is sealed. The texts say the Sabiti could not be killed, only bound, only contained, and that if they were ever released, they would darken the heavens and bring silence to the earth. That phrase, darken the heavens, appears in other contexts too. In Babylonian astronomy texts, it's used to describe solar eclipses and other celestial events that block out light, but in mythological contexts, it's used literally. The Sabiti, if released, would extinguish stars. How does a demon extinguish a star? Ancient mythology doesn't usually concern itself with astrophysics, unless, of course, the Sabiti weren't demons in the supernatural sense, unless they were something else, something physical, something dangerous enough that the Babylonians encoded a warning into their most precise astronomical records. The question is whether we'll listen to that warning in the future, whether when we finally develop the technology to travel between stars, we'll remember what the ancients tried to tell us. Because we're getting closer, NASA's Breakthrough Starshot initiative aims to send tiny spacecraft to Alpha Centauri within the next few decades. Private companies are developing technologies that could, theoretically, enable interstellar travel within this century. The James Webb Space Telescope is mapping exoplanets and analyzing their atmospheres, searching for signs of life. We're on the verge of becoming a spacefaring civilization, and when we do, we'll have to make decisions about where to go. Will we remember the planisphere? Will we check our star maps against the warnings carved in clay 3,000 years ago? Will we look at Orion and ask ourselves why every ancient culture that looked at those stars told the same story about the forbidden, the fallen, the sealed? Or will we dismiss it as primitive superstition, mythology that has no place in a scientific age? The Babylonian star map hangs in the British Museum. The forbidden star still burns in the constellation of Orion, and the warning carved in cuneiform 3,000 years ago still reads the same. Stay away. What was sealed there must remain sealed. If this story made you think, I've got a video on the Sumerian king list and the rulers who supposedly reigned for thousands of years. That video is on screen now. Click it, and if you made it this far, subscribe. I cover these kinds of mysteries every week.